Welcome back everyone. For today's video we are having Superbet Blitz tournament. Of course we finished the rapid portion. We covered a lot of interesting games. You can go check them out after you check this super good game between Magnus Carlsen, the right now world champion at Blitz at Rapid, and Nodirbek Abdusattorov, which is a former world champion in Rapid. Now, of course, there is a 200 points rating difference, but this game result will shock you, and the whole game will shock you because it will get so crazy at the end. Now, first of all, Magnus opens with e4, and Nodirbek gives him the first shock, which is pawn to d5, which is the Scandinavian defense. Now, the Scandinavian defense is not considered such a good opening on the highest level, because after queen takes d5, white gets to play knight to c3 with a tempo. Now, queen to d6 from Nodirbek, and now pawn to d4 from Magnus, knight to f6, and now knight to f3. Now knight to c6, putting pressure on the pawn on d4, intending to play bishop to g4 to try to pin this knight and win the pawn on d4. So white is gonna react quickly, and he correctly plays knight to b5, hitting the black queen. Of course you can throw in this check, but this check is really not good for you, because after bishop to d2, queen takes b2, you will lose the rook on the corner. So Nodirbek plays queen to d8, covering his pawn on c7. Now the bishop f4 here hitting the pawn would have been nice, but it is easily faced with knight to d5 hitting the white square bishop and covering the c7 square. So we get bishop to e2 from Magnus to stop any pins on the g4 to d1 diagonal. a6 from Nodirbek, kicking away this knight. And now one of the major things in the Scandinavian defense, that white is yes winning a tempo when he plays knight to c3 early on the game and gain a tempo on the black queen, but the knight on c3 is not a good piece. And why is that? Because it is blocking the movement of the c-pawn. So Magnus correctly understands that and did not go back to c3. Instead he went to a3, because this knight has got some potential on c4, and maybe later on the game he can play knight to e5. So bishop to g4, putting pressure on this white knight and also on the pawn on d4. Magnus plays knight to c4, and d4 is not a free pawn. You gotta calculate before, and after bishop takes c6, of course queen takes d4 is a horrible blunder, because bishop takes c6 comes with check, and after you take, you lose your queen. And also after knight to d4, there is bishop takes b7, and white is completely better, because after a line like something like rook to b8, then bishop takes a6 is coming, and white is just ahead by one pawn, and these two passed pawns on the queen side is going to be a major problem in the endgame. So Nodirbek understands that, and he correctly chooses to play pawn to e6, and now Nodirbek just castles. We get bishop to e7 from Nodirbek, and now pawn to c3 to completely defend the pawn on d4. Also, he is now freeing up the d3 square he could go later on, and avoid any knight to e5 tactics with this pen. So castles from black, and now we get h3, and now bishop to h5. Of course you do not trade your bishop, because after bishop takes f3 you just give a white a strong bishop on this diagonal, and he's maybe threatening to trade the knight and go knight to e5 and put pressure on your weak pawns. So we get bishop to f4 hitting the pawn on c7, and it's a London bishop, which is a really boring piece that you do not want to face as black. Knight to d5 hitting the dark square bishop, and right now bishop to g3. And now Nodirbek plays so aggressively with pawn to b5. Pawn to b5 is super aggressive move, because after you move this knight you create a weakness on c5 from this push on b5. So Magnus chooses to go back to d2, and now bishop to d6. Nodirbek is just trying to exchange some pieces, and overall he is solid on the queen side, except he's got only one weakness on c5. Of course the game may be a little bit boring right now, but believe me, it's gonna get crazier. So if you trade the bishops, then black gets to take back with the pawn. Now he is covering the c5 square, so you definitely don't want to do that. So Magnus plays knight to e4, hitting the dark square bishop, and now bishop to d6, and now knight takes the bishop on g3. Of course, right now he is hitting the light square bishop. Of course, again, you do not want to trade your light square bishop as this bishop will become a major problem on this long diagonal. So bishop to g6 from Nodirbek, and now queen to d2. He is just finishing the development and connecting the rooks. Queen to d6 from Nodirbek, and now a4. The idea behind a4 is that Magnus trying to free up the c4 square to push this knight later on the game. So we get knight to a5, threatening knight to b3 with the fork on the queen and the rook. Magnus drops back to d1, and now pawn to b4. Of course, he's trying to create some source of counterplay on the queen side, because if he just stands and play a little bit passively, he's gonna lose in the long run, because strategically speaking, white is a little bit better. So now Magnus plays his idea with pawn to c4, kicking away this knight, knight to f4 hitting this bishop, rook to e1 defends the bishop, and now you gotta free up yourself, and black did with pawn to c5. And right now you can see that black is a little bit better due to his initiative on the king side, and also his initiative in the center. He's putting pressure on the c5, on the d4 pawn with the pawn on c5. So bishop to f1 from Magnus, and now rook f to d8. He's increasing the pressure, and he decides not to release it. And now knight to e4, hitting the black queen and hitting the pawn on c5, basically forcing black to take the knight on e4. So rook takes e4, putting pressure on the knight, and now c takes d4, which is a little bit dubious. And right now Magnus punishes correctly with pawn to g3, hitting the knight, and after knight to g6, now rook takes d4. Queen to c7, because you gotta defend your knight and also defend your rook. Also, there is maybe some knight to b3 ideas coming on. So pawn to c5 from Magnus, and now rook takes d4, queen takes d4, and now knight b3. Now, of course, Magnus did not blunder an exchange, because Magnus sees queen to e4, and he is hitting the rook right now. If you take mine, I will take yours, and we go home, friends, correct? And yeah, of course, Nodirbek refuses that, because he will be worse at the end. After black will take, then the knight is gonna cover, and now the game is basically equal, but Nodirbek is trying to win the pawn on c5. So it gets crazier from here. Rook to d1 from Magnus, knight takes c5, hitting the white queen, and now queen to c4. He is relying on the spin, queen to b6, unpinning himself, and now just pawn to b3. He is consolidating his queen side. Now, of course, black is a little bit better, but the players is getting from here in a time pressure, and when it's a time pressure, it is really hard to come with the right moves. Now, I'm not saying that Nodirbek lost the game. Still, the result you will see it at the end. It is very shocking from here. Now, pawn to h6, and now rook to c1, hitting the black knight. Rook to c8, defend his knight, but he puts himself into a pen. And now queen to d4 from Magnus. He is pinning him diagonally and laterally, and yeah. And now pawn to a5, he's just trying to consolidate, because some bishop takes a6 was in the air. And now pawn to h4 from Magnus, trying to go pawn to h5 and kick away this knight, and it is super messy from here. Now, Nodirbek plays knight to e7 to avoid leaving h5 with tempo, and after knight to e5, now black could have played knight to d5 and tried to put the knight on c3, and he's got no problems at all. But Nodirbek chooses to go knight to f5, hitting the white queen, and basically kicking away this queen from this diagonal, so he is not longer pinned anymore. Now queen to g4 was the best move to try to put pressure on the king side, maybe later on play bishop to d3 and create some pressure, but Magnus chooses to go queen to c4, and he is really relying on this pin right now. Rook to c7, he is trying to go knight to a6 and leave his rook defended, and now Magnus finds the only move that gives white advantage, which is queen to b5, which is such a great move. Now the idea after queen takes b5 that he is going to take with the pawn, and now this pawn is super dangerous. For example, the best line is knight to d6, And after knight to d6, there is knight to d3, there is also pawn to b6. Both of them should be winning at least a pawn. So in the game, Abdusattorov got feared from playing the endgame even though he's up a pawn, but keep in mind that Magnus is the greatest endgame player ever. So queen to d6 from Nodirbek, he is hitting the knight right now, and Nodirbek overlooked that there is queen to e8 check here, and the game gets super messy and super crazy right on here. King to h7 from Nodirbek, and now knight takes f7. He is threatening some queen to h8, and also Nodirbek does not give you a draw as black. And why is that? Because after knight takes g3, there is queen to h8 immediately, and after king to g6, then there is knight to d6 dropping your queen. So you gotta move your queen here, and there is also queen to h8. The game is super messy right now. Now rook takes f7 would have been the best move, but Nodirbek plays queen to d4. Now of course the players is low on time from this position, but it gets super sketchy, and there is queen to h8. You are really never sure what is the best move in such positions, especially when you are low on time. So right now, if white plays queen to h8 after king g6, there is no deal. Okay, the knight is getting attacked. You'll have to go something like rook to c4, but after queen to f6, black is really consolidating his position, and I don't think that black is any more worse. Yeah, the engine gives white 0.5 advantage, but it's not really such a big deal. So, Magnus correctly plays the best move with 3 seconds on the clock, and he played pawn to h5 to fix this pawn, also to take away this square from the black king from running. So right now queen to h8 is a checkmate in one threat. Of course, again, the best move is sacrificing the exchange on f7, but Nodirbek chooses to go pawn to g6 and let the lady do its job. Okay, h takes g6 and king takes g6, and right now knight to e5, which is double check. You cannot take the knight, or you cannot block the check because it is a double check. It's checked by the knight and checked by the queen. So king to f6 from Nodirbek. If you try to play queen to g6 right now, I will take your knight. So Magnus chooses to play rook to e1, and actually rook to e1 is a blunder. And why is that? Why is that? Because Nodirbek plays knight to e4 with 2 seconds in his clock. He almost got flagged, but knight to e4 is such a beautiful move. And why is that? Because if you played queen to g6, then now I will easily take your knight, and actually you can see the king on e5, but if funny enough, white just got nothing, right? And black should be winning with rook to c7 incoming, and yeah, it's just GG. So after knight to e4, you gotta be really careful what to do here, because also queen to f2 is a major threat. So Magnus chooses to go knight to g4, checking the white king again, and now king to g7 back, queen takes e6 from Magnus, and now knight on e takes the pawn on g3, because there is a pin, and actually this move is again a blunder, because there is bishop to c4, and you cannot stop the mates coming from g8. But of course none of the players saw that, and now Magnus chooses to drop back to e5, and right now he is threatening queen to g6, major threat. And yeah, you may see here that the engine is giving white the advantage, and really white has got a great attack, right? And white should just end the game like 3 or 4 moves, but you will be shocked at the result. Knight takes f1 from Nodirbek, and the game just gets crazy and crazier and crazier. Because right now both players got 5 seconds, and there is nothing to really understand in the position. Now of course queen to g6 is the winning move, and Magnus actually played that, and after king to f8, the best move would have been queen takes f5 with check, and now you can just take the knight on f1 and easily just win the game, because there is no any checks. It's just up a knight, right? But Magnus shockingly did not see the knight and played queen to f6. Maybe he saw a checkmate or something, we don't know. but Nodirbek plays king to g6. And ladies and gentlemen, it is a +8 advantage for white right now, but let me introduce you to the worst move in the position. Actually, king takes f1 is a little bit sketchy, but you can live with it. But the horrible move, white played it and Magnus played it, which is queen to g6. If we give this position to any of you, I believe most of you will see that rook to g7 just ends the game, and Nodirbek plays it as well, and Magnus got really frustrated and he just walked away from the board, and Nodirbek gets a beautiful win. It's not really a beautiful because he played super well. The game itself was super beautiful. Go watch it live and enjoy it. Make sure to also check our beautiful games that we introduced before in this tournament, and thank you and see you in the next games.